Our next speaker for today is Ricardo Salvador. Ricardo is the senior scientist and director of the Food and Environment Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. This is Ricardo's first Farm to Cafeteria conference as well, but he's not a newcomer to the local foods movement. In fact, quite the opposite. While at Iowa State University, Ricardo worked with students to establish ISU's student-operated organic farm, and with faculty to develop the nation's first sustainable agriculture graduate program in 2000, which he chaired. Many of Ricardo's students from Iowa State University are now leaders in their own right in the local foods movement, and Ricardo had a big hand in shaping their paths, so we want to thank you for that, Ricardo. Ricardo and the Union of Concerned Scientists is also a key player in the Plate of the Union campaign, urging our next president to take bold action on reforming the food system. When Ricardo is not doing all of these things and more, he's running. He runs marathons. So if you want to find him, the running path surrounding the Monona Terrace is the place to be. That's where you'll find him. Ricardo also serves on the National Farm to School Network's advisory board. Please join your hands in welcoming Ricardo to the stage.
Thank you very much for that, Anu. What I'd like to do is to enroll you in a project to think more broadly about the work that we all do, which may be frightening because, as we've heard already this morning, what you propose to do is sufficiently difficult in its own right. And what I would like for us all to encourage is to think more boldly about the proposition that we can't effectively achieve all of the goals that we have set for ourselves unless we make our first priority in food system reform coming up with a more just food system. So by the time that I'm done, I hope that I've made the case that as we go out the door and you pursue all of the goals that you came to the conference with, for some of you it may be more nutritious foods, to reduce childhood obesity, to find new markets for your products, that you put as the large objective that will make all of that worthwhile to be in the service of a more just food system. So let me make the case for that. So we have heard already a little bit about the history of the National Farm to School Network, and Anu was very, very generous in terms of describing some of my involvement. But I really, since so many of you are Kellogg grantees and beneficiaries, I just need to disclose some family dirty laundry about this. And you should know that the National Farm to School Network exists no thanks to me, because the idea actually came to us when I was starting at the Kellogg Foundation, and I looked at it. In about 15 minutes, I made up my mind about it, and I said, impossible, this can't happen. It's too ambitious. They're trying to think too broadly. They're cutting across sectors that are not accustomed to working together. I don't see that anybody has the experience to do this. I discarded it. If it had been left up to me, we wouldn't be sitting in this room. So I have a lot of gall to be here and try to enlist you, because I think that you're actually the network that we need in order to be able to do the work that I've just described. And I should finish that story by telling you that you are actually here due to the fact that there was a much smarter program officer that worked at the Kellogg Foundation at that time, Gail Immig, who, there's always a way, went around her clueless colleagues, the other program officers in what at that time was rural development, and went directly to the Kellogg board and persuaded them that this was a brilliant idea. So here you are. So if you see Gail, she's the person that you need to thank. So, I have no shame. I need to enlist you to do this piece of work. And the reason is that you are the folks that have the greatest expertise in terms of how to procure, prepare, deliver food to our nation's children. And I'm going to make the case that that's actually going to be the beginning point for a more just system. But when we walk out of here, the theme of the conference is that we'll be moving together toward a particular end. Here's Gail. For those of you that don't know her, you'll recognize her when she's walking around. She doesn't like attention, so that's one thing that you need to bear in mind. She'll be trying to hide from you. So You've heard this expression here already. We're trying to get away from using this expression. And again, on the topic of having no shame, we actually had quite a bit to do with this at the Kellogg Foundation because of the fact that when we were looking for a way to talk about the work that we were doing around the period of 2006, we actually hired a consulting firm that told us that the problem with talking about a food system was that at that time nobody understood, the person on the street didn't understand that there was a system behind delivering their food. So when you talked about improving the food system, it was just noise that you were making. But if you talked about the system saying that it was broken and then talked about the things that it did wrong, that then people were curious about that, then they listened. They could identify things that then you pegged to a system that wasn't working optimally. But here's the reason why we're trying to get away from using this terminology. It conveys that at one time the system worked, and that now it is broken down and is not working. And a more accurate rendition, I want us all to zoom out and look at a broader narration of this story. A more accurate rendition is that the system is working exactly as it was designed. The system serves well those that have economic power. The system doesn't serve well those that don't have economic power, and it doesn't care. It wasn't designed to serve those purposes. So it is no accident that you find that there are hungry people in the United States, and that we have diseases such as these that are predominant among the poor in the nation. So, you know the well-worn track, because all of you exactly do this very same presentation. We have this estimated, and by the way, certainly a conservative estimate of the cost of diabetes to the nation annually, this cost for obesity, and this cause for cardiovascular diseases, the #1 killer of Americans. Notably, all of these chronic diseases, we can live with them, but this is a premature killer of Americans, and all of these could be preventable. They're all due to the way in which we eat. Some of you may be familiar with the writings of Mark Bittman, who is now a Food and Environment Fellow with us at the Union of Concerned Scientists, who very tidily summarizes the main feature of the food system by saying that it's hard to imagine having a food supply that's as abundant as ours and yet doing a worse job with it. Because one of the major features of it is that, in fact, it is very abundant, but this system actually makes us sick. And there's a sense in which the more profit the industry makes, the sicker we all get. So that there is a feedback loop that is not operating well to serve the public interest. So that not only is there a disparity in terms of the beneficiaries of the food system and in terms of the chronic diseases that we all suffer, really even those of us who believe that we benefit from the food system are not well served from the system either, because the main feature of the system is that it makes you sick. If you live in the United States for 30 years, you will be fighting overweight. You will be fighting obesity through nothing other than being hungry 3 times a day and eating what the food system offers you, what is most profitable to them. And so here's the point that I wanted to come back to. The United States has no moral standing that I can figure out to talk about feeding the 9 billion when we can't feed the 50 million hungry that this country embeds within its population. Now, here's what this looks like. The breakdown of the ethnicity within the United States looks something like this. You're all familiar with it. You'll also note this room doesn't reflect that, so I'll come back to this point. Now, take a look at poverty. In modern market economies, hunger tracks poverty. So these are about the same proportion of the hungry that you find among these different demographic groups. So you notice that there is a disparity. The ethnic groups in the country are overrepresented in terms of poverty. And this explains hunger. And this explains the prevalence of chronic disease as well. Now, the point that I'd like to make about this is that this is no accident. This is the design of the food system. And that may seem mysterious, but let me make it as plain as I can why that is, why this is a design of the system. The system is not broken. I know one narrative, whenever these statistics are cited, are that you have folks that really need to be more ambitious, You need folks that need to take better advantage of their opportunity, that the structure of the family is breaking down. When you follow that narrative far enough, you get to statements such as these people are basically a drag on our economy, they're taking our nation away from us. You've heard all of these narratives. So I would like to tie together the historical perspective of how we end up at a cross-section of statistics like that. Poverty. You're poor if you don't have access either to land, or you don't have access to rent, or you can't express your entrepreneurship, and therefore you have no visible means of sustenance. If you deprive people of their land, of their labor, of their ability to express their entrepreneurship, you are essentially manufacturing poverty. So this is the history of the food system. The land of the nation, especially this breadbasket that we're in, is the result of this nation's land grab not very long ago. Anu expressed or told you about my experience at Iowa State University, nearly 30 years there. It's the place that I call home, although I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a little bit. And I had salt of the earth, perfectly well-meaning young people often make statements in class that went something like this. You've all heard it. We are so blessed that we have this land, with a straight face. Now, I'm going to leave God out of it. I'm not qualified to talk about her. But I will tell you that I do know that there were very deliberate actions taken just 4 generations ago that explain why the population that is now farming this land has that land, and that it was a matter of government policy. 1865, a law was passed that essentially made it legal to appropriate this land. Now, land grab. Here are 200 recorded battles over a period of 50 years that systematically grabbed that land, beginning with the very helpfully named Indian Removal Act of 1830. You know, there's no humor in this, but today's Congress would be a little bit more creative. They might call it something like the Native American New Opportunities and Everything Needs to Have Jobs in It, and Jobs Act. But they were very clear in 1830 what they meant to do. So over 50 years, the native population was removed, moving eastward, reaching this part of the country, and consummated in the 1890s down in the southwest with the Apache Wars, and the Dakotas finally with the Battle of Wounded Knee. Intentional. If you want to find some of the most immiserated poor people on the planet, not just in the United States, go to some of these concentration camps that we now call reservations. Standing Rock. Go to some corners of the Navajo reservation, and you will see manufactured poverty and the chronic diseases that come along with poverty. Mrs. Obama, whom you just heard about, just 2 weeks ago went to the Santa Fe Indian School, spoke at their graduation ceremony, and spoke to them as the great-granddaughter of an enslaved man, great-great-granddaughter of an enslaved man, and said to them, we all recognize that this school was created specifically to systematically annihilate you, to destroy your culture. And now look at you, which is what I want to come back. So she recognizes the intentionality. So deprive people of their land, of their sustenance, self-provisioning capability, you create poverty. Also appropriate people's labor. Agriculture has always been, even think about the metaphor, when you farm something out, it means something you don't want to do yourself, you allocate to others. So agriculture has always been about this, exploiting labor. In this nation and across the entire continent of America, this was accomplished by, again, a systematic mercantile campaign. We need to remember and be very conscious of this. It lasted nearly 3.5 centuries, wherein we abducted families, separated them, transported them across the ocean, systematically exploited them, brutalized them, separated from their families, their cultures, their native foods, and even after emancipation, continued to prevent them from enjoying participation in the wealth that their labor helped to create. Because their labor helped to get us to the point of industrialization. And you can't get over something that isn't over. You know that to this day, through redlining, through systematic exclusion from fair lending practices, from rollback of civil rights, that we continue to exclude the descendants of that population. The benefits of the so-called democracy do not accrue to them at the same rate, including the benefits of the food system. And the food system exists because they were brought here for that purpose. First tobacco, then sugar, then cotton. And you can bet that the plantation owners throughout the South were not growing their own food either. So the gardeners and the people that were providing the food upon which the wealth of this nation was built were also these folks. Some of you know Anim Steele. Look up his recent TEDx talk. Anim tells a very poignant story. Those of you who know him know that before he founded the Real Food Challenge, he worked at the Food Project in Boston, and he tells this story of a brand new student that came to work at the Food Project and looked at an area of land that they were about to open up and said, "How much land is that?" And Anim, without thinking too much about it, said, "It's 40 acres." And the student could not take her eyes off of the 40 acres. And Anim says, "Come on, we got to go." And she says, "This is the first time I realize it." Anim says, "What?" "What 40 acres looks like." So to a young African-American woman, this was opportunity lost. Because you remember that in Virginia, North Carolina, the area around D.C., in Maryland, the promise was, after emancipation, that freed men and women would have 40 acres and a mule in order to be able to start their own self-provisioning with the farming skills where they were the experts at that time. And we reneged on that promise. Think of what might have been if that farming population had been able to grow and enjoy the benefits of their own entrepreneurship in the same way as every other farmer from that period of time was able to do. So this is no accident, it's systematic. And in the modern day, we continue to exploit labor. This is modern day slavery. I just got my notice that I need to hurry up, and so let me just give you the example of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which has discovered and undone modern day slavery in Central California and southern and Central Florida in the tomato harvest. The Obama administration recognized them because the Obama administration has a systematic effort to recognize and dismantle modern day slavery. This is no metaphor. This is people held in chains at night so that they would not escape, people from the Caribbean, people from Central America, as well as the old company store technique of so-called rent for shelter and charging more for rent than you pay for wages in order to keep people in bondage. Well, so this is all structural. There are laws. Again, due to shortness of time, I'm just going to have to jump to some of these punchlines here. You'll see a quotation here: "I hope we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations, which are there already to challenge our government to a trial by strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country." 245-year-old statement made by Thomas Jefferson, who could see some of the things that the original laws of the nation needed to be able to curtail. So by policy, here are some of the things that we can do right now. We make an exclusion to labor law that makes it possible that children as young as 12 can work in the fields. Now, you will hear all kinds of stories about why that exclusion exists, so that parents don't get charged for abusing their children on their own farm. This is the story. That exemption exists so that children of farm workers can actually be out there picking things such as berries, where their little fingers are more efficient than the fingers of adults. There are also laws that make it so there are no occupational safety provisions for farm laborers who are exposed to some of the more toxic chemicals that we use in agriculture. That's perfectly fine for farm laborers. These people, it would be a laughable proposition for them to expect that we would give them workplace protection, that we would give them overtime. So these are laws. We know exactly what we're doing in order to exploit labor in the modern day. So every time that you see this statistic here, the thing to remember is this is no accident. These disparities are historical roadkill on the way to creating the modern day food system. So we cannot continue to preserve these features of the food system in such a way that after we've done all of the work that all of us in this room are devoted to, these same disparities continue to exist, which is why I say justice is the thing that needs to be the screen for every other thing that we do in order to address our work. Now, I've overstayed my welcome here, so let me just give you some reasons why we should be energized and motivated as we leave this room to work together. It will take all of us in order to do this better. So, you see an example here of what groups like Food Corps and you are doing. The reason why I claimed at the beginning that you are just the people that need to be enlisted to do this work has to do with some of what we just heard from Deb and the work that the administration is doing. So we are very fortunate that we have a president and a first lady that get it when it comes to food issues. We have never had this kind of support for food issues in a presidential administration. Now, Anu mentioned that she and many of you probably in this room are part of coalitions that we're working with to try to ensure that the next president maintains this momentum. It's very important work. But when you talk to their team, this is what they'll tell you. Many of you in this room, and a lot of our colleagues not here, will say it is wonderful what they've accomplished, but here are all the things that they could have done and they didn't. And here's what their team will tell you. That is not defined by the president or by Congress. What these bodies can do is actually defined by the culture of the nation and what we're ready to do. So the best thing that we can do is to shift the culture so that the things that we talked about right now are not tolerable, where none of us would put up with them. There's a period of time in this country not so long ago where we put up with the fact that half of the population could not vote. Once the culture shifted and we realized that was intolerable, that was a waste of human potential, then women's suffrage was passed into law. But it was the culture that led. The same thing happened with civil rights. The culture needed to be ready for that. It is shameful how long it took for that culture to shift to that point, and that the job is not finished, but it was culture that led, not policies. And present day, we're seeing the same thing with marriage equality. It was the culture that shifted that allowed President Obama to then do what he has done. So you are the folks who have the actual buttons on shifting culture because you're shaping the food preferences and the knowledge, the understanding of children around food, so that the false narratives that I just described should not be transmitted to one more generation about the fact that the food system is this bright, shiny, modern creation where everybody has access. That narrative needs to be something that we correct and that we tell in the fullness of its truth so that then we're able to create a different culture around food and expect different things from it, including Native American food sovereignty and the health that will come with that, including being able to enjoy tomatoes without knowing that we're sanctioning slavery. Here you see some of the work of the Detroit Black Sovereignty group that some of you may be familiar with, where overcoming a century and a half of stigma around being enslaved to perform agricultural work, they're taking back their self-determination around producing their own food, important to do both in urban and in rural settings for the descendants of slaves. Here you see the work of ALBA in California, which realizes that farm laborers can be owners and farmers, so that we get away from the notion that the system is here to serve some of us and the rest of us are here to serve those others, that the rest of us are just interlopers serving the privileged and the powerful in the country. Think of what we can accomplish together if all of us can be owners, entrepreneurs, and contributors rather than some of us being benefited and some of us being exploited. And so that is the food system that we need to create together. Here's an example of what they do at the Restaurant Opportunity Centers, taking folks that work in the proverbial back of the house and turning them into the owners of the restaurants. Now, I need to tell you a personal story. You'll need to indulge me. This is the send-off here. So my perspective is involved by experience and by study, but it's also informed by this. So here's mom and dad. So Mama is the kindest, most conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical Protestant you will ever meet. German-American woman from California, from a daring family, who went to Mexico as a missionary and met Dad, a Native American Zapotec man from the state of Oaxaca, which gave me some of the perspectives that I bring you, because that meant that I had a front row seat to both of these narratives. I understand where they come from fully, literally mother's milk. Now, here's my send-off for you. I grew up in southern Mexico till I was a teenager. So that means I was baked by the time that I came to the United States. And it still happens to me, I'm an old man now, but it still happens to me that I'll see something that Americans do, and I'll say to myself, yeah, that's a very American thing. So let me give you one example of that. So one feature of American culture is this: you're never satisfied, you're never happy. Good is never good enough. And that's culturally defined, because you think that's a compliment, and it's not a compliment for everyone, but take it as a compliment. That's one thing that I can tell you that I notice with my teenage Mexican eyes when I look at American culture, and here's how it has to do with the food system. So the American food system is a fantastic success story. One of the things that it has licked is productivity. It has licked scale. It is mechanized, which has removed some drudgery for some people in the system. And that is not good enough, as we've just reviewed. None of us should be satisfied with the food system that we have unless everyone is fully able to benefit from the food system, and we no longer have to take time to talk about the disparities in the food system. So, my parting words for you are that it's going to take all of us to create this shift. I think it can happen relatively quickly if we stop transmitting fairy tales about the way that the food system works and start telling the truth, so that none of us can tolerate being a part of that kind of toxic system, exploitative system. And if you take to heart the message that I just described, that good is not good enough, we can take all of the good, all of the success, everything that we've learned about the food system, and improve it so that it is fair, so that it doesn't exploit, so that it is just. And that is the single most American thing you can do. Thank you.